People in the financial sector, they're smart and they're recognizing that this game, they're not dumb.
No.
You know, that's one of all the things, of all the insults we can lob at them. It's not that they're dumb, right? Like that's not the case. You can say that about a lot of different areas. Politics, you can be like, that's kind of dumb. But ultimately in the financial sector, they're smart. So then you have people like, you know, like Klaus and the World Economic Forum. They start putting out these very strange, cryptic ideas about
scary,
about the way that things, that the Great Reset, all the way things are going to go forward. You will own nothing and you will be happy. What the fuck are they even talking about?
That's wonderful.
Like what? How does that even make sense, right? But in some ways, if you get into their mind and you think, oh shit, they know that the system cannot sustain itself any longer. So what is their solution? Well, all they know is control. All they know is control. Yeah. That's all they know. They've controlled their companies. They've controlled their businesses. They have this inflated idea of their own mind and their own brain power. And they think, you know what? If we actually controlled everything and kept it away from the stupid people, you know, in this mindset, like we're the smart ones, we kept it away from the stupid people, then we could control everything completely. And if we could control everything completely, it would all work. Well, it doesn't fucking work that way. It can't work. But you can get in the mindset of them thinking like, what we need is more control.
Right.
And so this becomes this kind of slippery slope of justification towards a totalitarian dystopia. And that's something that, you know, really you write about with great trepidation of where this could potentially lead with central bank digital currency. So take us down this trajectory of dystopia that, you know, really you're afraid that we may be navigating towards. And then we'll talk about the ways to get off that bus and try to create a new system.
Right. I think that's the trajectory, you know, that's the inevitable trajectory. If we follow the capitalist line, you know, the capitalist drive in the current situation where more and more labor becomes redundant and there's no need for labor for that, for mass labor any longer. We end up with a lot of the population being superfluous, and they need somehow to be controlled and given some kind of reason to exist, right? Unless they get rid of us, you know. There's other solutions we don't want to even think about, right? The eugenetics, etc., eugenics rather, and so on. But I think the WEF advert is a wonderful one, really, and it's unfortunate for them that they put it out. They got rid of it straight away, almost, you know, after people started talking about it. But you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. It's a wonderful one because it really tells us what the reset is about, right? The reset they're trying to implement, and that is they know very well the workers will be poorer and poorer. So the only way in which they will be able to continue to exist is by borrowing more and more and become enslaved to a monetary system controlled from above, fundamentally, right? And I think that's why they are talking so, they're so excited about the central bank digital currencies, because that's one way in which they could really control the monetary flow and control whatever money one has in one's bank account. You know, they can actually give the money to the people who are out of work. You know, think about all these universal benefit, UBIs programs for people who are unemployed, etc. I think those will be the first ones to on the receiving end of this kind of monetary slavery program that it's in the making, in a way, right? And CBDCs are the perfect tool to implement it, because with central bank digital currencies, they've got they say that. They say we have the technology to implement this and to control people, to control what people spend, the amount of money that they have in the bank account. We are giving them the money, and therefore we have the right to control everything they do. In a post-work society, right, in a post-labor society, this for them seems to be the natural solution. People will rent, will not own anything. They might be able to rent if they behave, if they do the things that we tell them to do, right? If they don't consume in a certain way, if you pay the taxes, taxes in a certain way, if they don't. So everything will be about controlling people, and I think it will also be about some kind of humanitarian justification for that. Right? They can't just impose it by brute force. They'll have to find some sort of humanitarian justification, whether it's climate change or something else or some kind of emergency. That's why I call it emergency capitalism, because it's all based on that justification. They need to justify why we can't spend, why we need to stay at home, why we can't go to work, why we have to consume in a certain way, why we have to be so to me, that's the direction. It's very clear to me that that's the way we're going, because we are kind of exiting the work society of the past. We are entering another type of capitalism, which is very dark, very, very dark, and that it's prone to implosions. Maybe even a market crash could be the beginning for this new type of monetary slavery that in a sense is in the making, based on mass unemployment or mass underemployment, of course, right? I mean, this is what we have to deal with here ultimately with CBDCs as well. They are the solution for them to this inevitable, I think, drive towards a post-work capitalist society where
so in this paradigm, just so people are clear, so there's a central bank digital currency, which is not too dissimilar from the currency that we currently have, but it's the central bank just absolutely having full autonomy over the entire money supply. Yeah. And then where it gets really nefarious is we've already seen the creation of vaccine passports, which a lot of people talk about, is the kind of the entryway, the door that's opening towards a digital ID. And this is something that's already occurring in China with social credit scores and the ability for every single person to have a digital identification, and then based upon their actions, whether the government likes the actions or doesn't like the actions, they can control the population. So the control that already exists in another part of the world, that formula could actually start to creep into the West. And it could creep into the West through vaccine passports, then becoming digital IDs, and then extending beyond vaccination into other policies like what food you eat, how much you drive, what decisions you make. Also dystopian, in a dystopian world, also what comments you make,
right,
what things you say on social media, what protests you, and of course if they linked it to the phone, then you would know, and you had to leave it on, then they would know where you are, whether you were participating in something. And so you get this potentiality of absolute control and this total dystopia. I mean, it becomes very Orwellian at this point. Now, there was a lot of people who were saying, oh, vaccine passports, it's all a fucking conspiracy theory. It's never going to, well, it's already started to happen. So these next steps can happen. It's not that they can't happen. We don't know if they will. Who knows? Yeah. But like that way in which it could happen is fucking terrifying, because that is this dystopia of total control where nobody actually has any leverage anymore. We don't have actually our own economic wealth and power. It's all controlled and mediated by a single authoritarian, totalitarian source.
I think, with especially with vaccine passport, people don't realize, right, the potential they have. It's the first step, potentially, right? It's the first step towards this kind of digitalization of life that will become more and more a way of controlling us. It's not necessarily the end in itself. It's only the beginning of the installation of this digital infrastructure, which will be more and more linked to our identities, and therefore will be able to control us more and more completely. So it's only opening the door to this new world, right, that awaits us out there, the vaccine passports. And it's a huge step to convince people that they need it, It's a huge victory for them already, regardless of whether they will continue or not in this year, or they will be dismissed and whatever. They're already there. They've already broken that taboo, as it were, right? So they will easily continue. They can force us to use them again. For there's another pandemic or another emergency. Here we are. We already done it in the past. We can do it again, and that allows them to gain ground on what they want to do.
Yeah, once they have access to this technology, then the fear is, like, if you have access to more control, the natural inclination when you're in the myth of control is that if you have access to control, you're going to use it. And every time that the government has been granted access, or any large body really has been granted access to power and control, we've typically seen them utilize and wield this power and control, which is also why all of the founding documents of our nation and so many of the great thinkers warned against the natural inclination of tyranny to go to ever greater levels of control. And we're not saying that that's for sure what's happening or that's the only way, but it becomes a possibility, and with the possibility there comes danger.
It becomes a very real possibility. They will encounter huge problems. It's not an easy one. The infrastructure is huge in itself. They have to wait for the right moment to implement it, because people, at some point they will sort of realize that it's not necessary, that you don't have to do that. So they need the right emergency, the right crisis. Maybe a huge market crash, much worse than 2008, reducing people to poverty and therefore forcing people to accept these conditions. It could happen that way, but there has to be the right timing. They have to have the right moment. They have to do it at the right moment when the infrastructure is ready. It's a huge infrastructure. It's not easy for central banks to control everybody's bank account, even in technological terms, right? It's not that easy. So it's something in the making, but we have to be aware that that's the trajectory. That's where we're going, little by little.
If they had artificial intelligence,
yes,
that was controlled, then all of a sudden it gets way easier. Yeah. It gets way easier to make these controls. They pipe in the directives into an artificial intelligence machine, and then all of a sudden it's actually very precise exactly how they're able to control and how they're able to maneuver the infrastructure. So that's another potential danger.
So important to keep some kind of critical awareness, right? To be aware of these things and to reject certain forms of blackmail, even like moral blackmail, emotional blackmail. We shouldn't give in to this. We should keep some kind of autonomy, critical autonomy somehow, and we should form some sort of resistance to this, right? I mean, it's quite simple. Without some sort of disruption or resistance to this, there's no emancipation for us. We're gonna follow in line more and more to what we're told to do. So that's what's really been frustrating for me over the last 2 years, I have to say, right? The ease with which they've done what they wanted to do, and people have just followed. And I know you talked about this before with Professor Desmet, for example, Matthias Desmet. So I don't want to go back there, but
the way that you talk about this is powerful, because you're talking about how as soon as you start asking these questions, you're labeled as a conspiracy theorist. And then as soon as you're labeled as a conspiracy theorist, then all of a sudden, all of the questions that you're asking can be discarded.
Exactly.
And you say the epistemology of conspiracy theory drives much of today's propaganda as a rhetoric of exclusion. The a priori rejection of paranoid thinking leaves the official narrative as the sole bearer of truth, irrespective of empirical verification.
Thank you for
And so this is coming across in so many different ways, whether you're talking about it from a medical perspective. All right, what is the virtue of vaccination versus non-vaccination? What's the virtue of mask versus non-mask? There's this idea that you either follow science and the truth, or you're a conspiracy theorist. And if you're a conspiracy theorist, you're also some right-wing fascist, blah, blah, blah. They put all of these other things to actually dehumanize and desensitize people to actually the critical thinking, which is essential. Yeah. Essential. For science itself is essential.
That's the blackmail I was referring to, right? I'm not going to give in to that blackmail. I don't care if they call me a conspiracy theorist. I want to keep open the possibility of doubt and critique without being labeled a conspiracy theorist, without being excluded from public debate. I know it's too late.
We've already been labeled.
I know it's too late, but at least we're here talking about it, right? So there's still some space, and we need to make the most of it. But the label will be there. It's an easy game for them, right? They come up with some, it's a way of generalizing, of especially it's a way of making sure that there are no disagreements with regard to the official line, right? Everybody should follow the official line. Everybody else who has doubts, who wants to express doubts, is immediately disqualified by being called a conspiracy theorist, right? And all the list of adjectives and attributions that go along with it that you mentioned, because all of a sudden you become a right-wing extremist. All of a sudden you become a racist. All of a sudden you become a sexist. All of a sudden you become some kind of, there's so many of them, right? Crazier and crazier. And just because you've raised your hand and said, look, wait a second, let's talk about it again. I have some doubts. Tell me this, tell me. So you cannot even have doubts any longer. That's the big problem today for critical thinking.